In this video, I explain how to replace the rear shocks in a Ford Fusion. It's a pretty easy job. The nice thing is you don't have to go into the trunk and remove any of the trim there to try to get to the top of the shocks. Everything's basically in the wheel well. There's a bracket that you have to remove. It's mounted to the top of the shock. That's actually in the wheel well itself. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go along. Overall, it's a pretty easy job. Definitely something you can do as an entry-level kind of mechanic. The time it takes, probably 1 to 2 hours. If you're pretty quick, you could do it in less than one. First timers, especially kind of struggling through it, no extra tools or anything like that, probably 2 hours. It's pretty straightforward, actually. It's not that hard. You kind of lift up the car and put some jack stands underneath it, take the wheels off. The wheels are actually a huge pain in the butt to get off because each of the lug nuts have like this aluminum cap over them. It makes it really hard for like a 19mm socket to fit on. And we ended up using just the regular tire iron that comes with the car, and then I actually had the owner remove the lugs because I was a little unsure because there's a plastic cover over the not only the lugs had an aluminum cover, but the rims had a plastic cover over them that I was worried about damaging. But they just come off like kind of really any other car, just like that aluminum cover on the lug nuts, little cap on the lug nuts is kind of a pain in the butt. I'm trying to think of anything else, but let's get started. So removing the shock's fairly easy. There's 4 bolts, so there's 2 here, and then there's 2 on the bottom down here. Basically, this is an 18mm, there's a 15mm bolts at the bottom. Once those are removed, you can just simply remove the shock. Then you're just going to have to remove this top portion right here. There's a nut on the top. That can be a little bit of a pain in the butt to get off, but essentially that's all you need to do. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and remove those, and then loosen these, and then we'll pull the shock out. So once the shock's out, clean off the top here. I spray it with a little bit of WD-40. It'll help it just as it's coming up off the threads there. It does help to have a handy helper hold the thing for you. You can grab it if you're replacing this. Yeah, didn't see your thumb there, but if you're replacing the shock, then you can grab it by this right here. It's okay. It'll destroy, when we install it, we actually ended up grabbing it here as well, because this boot will help protect it if you get up high enough. But right now, grabbing it here is easier, and then you can just get a socket with an impact and pull it off. This is a 15mm. The replacements came with a 17mm nut, so that's a little bit different. So then, just use an impact to take that nut off. If you don't have, another option is to grab it here with like a wrench or something like that. Not as convenient. Because we found that you started bottoming out and weren't able to get it completely off before. Alright, once the top's off, the new shock, I put a little bit of anti-seize on it just so if we have to replace it, it's easier. Basically, that comes off, this dust cover comes off, slides up on top of the other shock, and then this can go here. The orientation doesn't matter at the moment, just as long as up is up. And you can tell because there's a big cavity at the bottom that goes down. And what we're going to do is you got to put the nut back on. So you can try holding it. One way is to grab it underneath here, up where you know that the shock won't slide up that far and tear the seal. That's what you want to try to avoid. So that's why you typically don't try to grab the shock cylinder, but you can take some paper towel, shop towel or whatever, and to grab it just to help hold it, and then you can use an impact to get it back on. Sometimes you can just hold it with an impact in order to be able to drive it on without actually having to even do that. If you don't have an impact, then you can grab it here, or you can try grabbing it at the top here and using a wrench to get it down. What I found is that because it's slightly inset here, you eventually reach a point where you can't get any tools on it, and you can't get a wrench on it, and you can't get a socket over it because you have to hold this. So we ended up having to grab it underneath there. So it's up to you. Alright, so we got this back on. the nut will just tighten down basically till it stops. Torquing it, as you know, you don't have to put a lot of torque on it because it's a lock nut. But basically, once it gets stopped, you're pretty much done. Now, we found the easiest way to get it in is to start with the bottom bolts first. And this is a Monroe that we used to replace it with. And instead of, so the other shock had weld nuts like installed at the bottom. This is going to have a bolt and nut combination. And I found getting it started, I believe it was down with the nuts or the bolts and capture the nuts at the bottom versus going the other way. But do whatever makes sense to you. The problem is that the control arms are at like a slight angle, and this cross piece is going to be straight perpendicular to it, so you're trying to match up those. And it'll seem at first like you might not get a lot of thread engagement, but don't worry, when it tightens down. Then I found it was easier to then put the top piece into place and get those bolts in. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, shock is installed. Tighten these things up. I used an impact, got them in there real tight, and then tried to tighten them with a hand tool, basically as tight as you can get them. The bolts at the bottom, you're probably looking at like something 60 or 80 foot-pounds of torque. I put NECs, at least on the ones on the bottom. I put NECs on this stud here. I didn't put NECs in here because these didn't seem like it was getting any rust or anything like that because it's interior to the car. The car will sit a little higher at first, but then that'll settle back down as the shocks kind of get settled. That's pretty much it. Pretty easy. Thank you. I hope you liked the video. Please give me a thumbs up if you did. If you have any constructive criticism or some questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. And please feel free to check out my other videos. I do some stuff on photography if you're interested, especially some Milky Way photography. If you like that kind of stuff, then subscribe. Thank you very much.